Welcome to the Vets Talking Pets podcast. From scales to tails, real talk with real vets. No pet subject is off limits. With your hosts, Dr. Maggie Roberts and Dr. Vanessa Howie.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Vets Talking Pets with Dr. Maggie Roberts and Dr. Vanessa Howie. So in our last podcast, we talked about the controversial topic of vets fees and why vets are charging what they have to charge. So today we're going to look more into how owners can get the best out of their vet practice and make the best choices for their pets.
Yes, and I think what's really important is that it's not just about shopping around, that it is about sort of, I suppose, getting best value for money, but also, I suppose, getting the best welfare for your pet, because obviously getting the best out of the practice isn't just about money.
No, that's right. It really is important the animal is the number one here, aren't they? So that's what we should be thinking about the most. What is the best for that animal and also for you as an owner, because you are also important in this whole kind of equation.
Absolutely. It's really important that you develop a good relationship with your vet so you can actually discuss these things, which can be quite tricky at times. And like any service, you do want to be getting best value, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's the cheapest. So some practices might have specialist staff with extra qualifications, or they might have more advanced equipment. So it is going to cost more, but you might get a better service or more information for diagnosis, etc. Also, the other thing we have to remember is that all vet practices must in some way provide 24-hour emergency cover. And that's something some vets do their own within their own staff, and others use a specialist service. And obviously it's worth asking about that, isn't it, before you actually sign up with a practice.
It really is. What transport do you have in the middle of the night if you suddenly need to get your pet to the vets? Can you get there easily? Can you drive? Are you relying on public transport? Do you need to walk there? So thinking about what's easiest for you and your pet as well is really important. I think that goes for the definitely for your practice that you're looking at and choosing. It's really important, as we just said, to build that relationship with the vets, but also actually what facilities do they have? Do you feel comfortable going into that practice? Does your animal feel comfortable? Is it somewhere that you can get to easily? Thinking about if you've got a really sick animal, they don't want to be travelling great distances necessarily to get there.
And we all know how some pets don't really like travelling.
No, exactly.
My cat really hates it. And sometimes if practices have a specialist out of hours service, it's sometimes at another town. So it's worth thinking about all those sort of things. And I suppose the big difference in cost is really about which treatment you choose. Because for many diseases or accidents or whatever, there are different options for treatment, and it is something that your vet should be discussing all the options with you. And it does really depend on your pet and you and your particular circumstances, not just money, but perhaps your ability to perhaps give medication to your pet. So it's really important to be able to have that conversation and be sort of open and honest, I suppose, on both sides.
Yeah, and I think even just talking about circumstances and medication, it may be that for one condition you could easily medicate your pet because it's, say, for example, it's a nice palatable liquid that you could put in their food. Yeah. But your pet may then be diagnosed with something else with actually the tablets are impossible to give, and that's the only way you can medicate them. So circumstances are really important, that they will actually influence what decisions you make and to treatment. You may also be in work and have a good job, good salary, and be able to afford a treatment. It may be you get made redundant or something and lose your job. So actually circumstances change there. So it's not necessarily just all about money, it's about how that animal will cope with the medication or the procedures. Even the diagnostics to find out what's going on might be quite stressful for some and unpleasant, and actually not be a big enough gain in the end result of everything.
Yeah, so it's about weighing up, I suppose, what are the benefits of tests or medication or surgery or whatever compared to any negatives. And I think a really important thing to remember is vets can't do things to your pet without your consent unless it's a really acute emergency. But you have to give what we call informed consent. And that means you've got to really understand the treatment that's going to be done and give your permission for it to go ahead. And that's why most practices use consent forms.
That's right.
I think they pretty much all do now, so that there is a written record, and they might put an estimate of cost on that, which obviously is an estimate. It's not an absolute quote because you don't know what might happen in addition. But it's really important that you are clear of what treatment is going to be done. So if in any doubt, ask your vet, and they should be very happy to explain to you what the treatment is.
That's it. And even if your animal's out under anaesthetic and you're not at the practice, they should be phoning you even to get verbal consent, shouldn't they? So if it's not,
they should.
If they're going to do anything extra, so you shouldn't be suddenly presented with an unexpected bill at the end, or a procedure having happened to your animal that you've not consented.
And I must admit, one thing that was sometimes a little frustrating when you're in practice, when we would say, give us a number because we're probably going to have to call you, and then when you called, the people didn't answer, because sometimes it was quite a critical decision that had to be made. So it is worth remembering that if the vet wants your number because they're going to have to speak to you, then
really
you do have to have it available, particularly if perhaps it's something where that they're looking to see if there's something really nasty going on, that they might want to talk to you about it very quickly. And for lots of things, as we've mentioned, there are different options. Like a good example of this, and something we sort of talked about a lot in charity care, was if you had a cat with a really badly broken leg, what do you do? There might be a possibility of putting it all back together with very complicated orthopaedic surgery, but that would be expensive. But also it would require usually keeping the cat in some sort of cage or pen, so they rested. And obviously for some cats that is just not going to be something that they would tolerate.
And then the stress of staying in may delay healing as well, so it just perpetuates the problem.
And so for some, it might be better to actually amputate the leg, which sounds really dramatic, but actually cats on 3 legs do really well.
Yeah, they do.
Firstly, they've got 4 to start with, which is better than us only having 2 to start with. So, but they're incredibly agile, even with 3. The very first one I ever did, my first amputation, which was a very sad case of a cat that got by a combine harvester in a field. That I did the surgery, and when I did the check-up and asked how the cat was going on, and they said it had escaped and had managed to climb a tree, and that was within a week of the surgery. So although it wasn't ideal, I felt, well, at least the cat was obviously feeling okay. And certainly when we were in charity practice, we had to think about these things because we wanted to get the cats into a home as quickly as possible. So it's just the sort of scenario that demonstrates how some of these questions are really important. And certainly, I mean, with cats probably more than dogs, but it still depends on the individual dog, but how well can the animal be handled?
Yeah, completely. So are you able to medicate them? Actually, I remember we had a cat in clinic once that was a friendly cat at home, but just was not coping with the stress of being in, and the cat needed to be on a drip. He'd gone into acute kidney failure, sadly. And the actual process of even having to put that drip line in and have that drip there with the poor cat, we had towels up and hidey holes and everything, but we actually physically couldn't get in there easily to then examine the cat to see if there was any improvements, let alone then taking more blood tests to check how things were going on. So actually for that cat, we did end up making decisions to not carry on with treatment because it was so stressful for the cat. But actually that was a welfare issue keeping the cat in on that treatment. So it's not always right for all animals. So we've got to weigh up what is best. If handling's not possible, actually, what can we do to minimise stress, and actually make it a better experience for that animal.
And even if it's something like a pet bird, sometimes even just catching them, particularly if you've got an aviary, is really difficult and stressful. And the worst
sadly,
thing
I've had a budgie die on my consulting table clipping nails. So
it does happen. So it's really thinking about what the welfare cost is.
And also, is there a need for ongoing treatment? I think that's the other thing, isn't it? We might be able to provide a procedure, whether that's surgery or something, that actually is part of the treatment, but actually will the animal then require further treatment afterwards, and can they cope with that treatment?
And if it's a case of giving medication every day, obviously some animals are really good, but others, they might be really, really difficult to actually do that. And if it's a wrestle every day, then...
And are you at home every day? Would you be able to do that as an owner? Have you got somebody that could help you to do that? So actually it might not be practical if you travel away with work, for example.
Particularly something like diabetes, if you're having to inject insulin twice a day and it has to be 12 hours apart, are you always going to be able to do that? And we're not wanting to try and sort of be negative about it, because lots of people do it very successfully, but I think there's a lot of these things that and your vet, your practice should be talking to you about these options, but it's not, as we said before, it's not just about the money, it's about the practicality and what's right for that individual animal, and what's the outlook. That if the outlook is really, really poor, how much are you going to put the pet through? Whereas if it's an animal where, yes, it's perhaps quite heavy in terms of the intervention, but it's sort of bad for a short period of time and then everything's going to be fine, then you might be prepared to tolerate a bit more for the animal if actually then they've got years of
good quality of life.
But I think often with old animals, particularly if they've got more than one thing that's causing a problem, then you really have to think about how much would you put them through. So
definitely. And thinking about treatments, I know we've touched on talking about referral practices and specialist treatment. Can your local practice actually offer the treatment that's needed, or are you going to have to travel? How far do you need to travel? It's likely that the referral centre will be more expensive. They've got more specialists there who've been trained more, so they've got more expensive equipment, so things are going to be more expensive. But actually, yes, how far are you prepared to travel, and how far will your pet cope with travelling?
Because I sadly had to take my existing cat, to a specialist last year, and I mean it wasn't a really long journey, but it was about an hour, and he absolutely hates the car, and he just meowed the whole way. And they were very good, and he's still quite a young cat, so it was worth doing it. But I did feel terrible because he hated it so much. He even hates it just with the 10-minute drive to Mup, the normal practice I use. And it was something I couldn't treat him at home. It needed a lot more intervention, so he had to go in. But it is something to sort of think about as well. And now there's quite a lot of referrals, aren't there? A lot of specialists.
There are. They've really popped up in the last 10 years. There's a lot more certainly than when I qualified. It was just mainly the big universities that had specialist centres, and I think there are probably only about 4 or 5 big referral centres in the country. So
certainly when I started, there were the universities, and then there was one private referral centre in London, and we used to refer a few things to them, and then slowly at first there are a couple more, and it's sort of increased exponentially, really, hasn't it? Particularly over the last 10 years, I would say, where there's lots and lots of specialists, but there are a lot of things that I used to do in practice that now often get referred, because there are the specialists, and vets in general practice almost feel, well, the specialist will do it better. And
It's becoming almost a bit more like in human medicine, isn't it? You've got your general practitioner, and then actually in the practice treating your animal first opinion, and then they're referring on for anything else to referral centres. It's obviously not everywhere, but that is what is happening in particularly some areas of the country.
Absolutely. But it may be that your local practice can do it, and perhaps there is, they probably can do it perfectly well. But, occasionally perhaps there's a slightly greater risk of post-operative problems. But if it's something that you can afford, then it has to be something that's thought about.
And this is where the model has changed, hasn't it, really? So the days of James Herriot, your general practitioner vet that did all species, farm, horses, cats and dogs, bunnies, etc., other small furries, we're getting... Now we've got a lot more small animal practices that are just vets dedicated to doing the dogs, cats, small furries, in comparison to we've got limited farm animal practices now, but they tend to be farm only, so cows, sheep, pigs, etc. And then you've got your equine vets who sit separately. So there's very few of that traditional what we called mixed practice, which you didn't start in mixed, did you? I started in mixed practice, which we did all species really. So.
It's really only areas that are perhaps quite rural or remote, more areas of Scotland or Wales or parts of Yorkshire and things like that, where they still have that. But sometimes even within the practice, individual people will tend to specialise. Because quite frankly, there's so much to know. When you're dealing with so many different species and more advanced treatments, it's really hard to know enough about everything.
We've got a lot more kind of urban town practices as well, haven't we now? So
we have.
And we know that pet numbers have gone up, I suppose, for smallies, so
yes,
there's more of a demand.
Yeah, and certainly if you're a vet in general practice, when someone brings a snake in or a fish or something like that, it can be quite a challenge.
It can.
I used to see a snake called Arnie, who was a Burmese python, something like 20 feet long. Would it be 20? That seems an awful lot. 10 perhaps. But he was massive. And there would be a wriggling... He was 20 kilos. That was what it was.
6 foot. He probably was 6 foot.
He probably was 6 foot. At least.
7 foot?
Yeah, so he was probably 2 metres. But he was 20 kilos. He was really heavy because he was sort of very... muscular, and so there'd be a wriggling sports bag in the waiting room and it would be Arnie, and he was very good to handle. But actually it's hard to be an expert on all those exotics, and now people would tend to take them to specialists, which I think is a really good thing.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this in earlier podcasts, but the consideration therefore if you're going to be getting an exotic species is actually how far are you going to be prepared to travel to get to a specialist vet and be able to treat them. I saw on my local Facebook page only recently somebody saying, I go down to a certain vet, which I know is 20 miles away from where we live. So actually, and a little bit of complaining. So actually, thinking about this beforehand, because, not all vets in general practice will be able to treat your exotics.
Yes,
Or confidently and competently, I suppose.
Yes, and they may just not have the medications available. But there's so much to learn about all these species that and obviously it's very specialist if we're talking about things like reptiles or even fish, really. That it's really important where your nearest exotic specialist, and that's what we call them, exotic pets.
Right, so moving on slightly, what are our top tips then for getting good value out of your practice, Maggie? What are we going to suggest to everybody? We're good at talking, but I think it's time now to give some tips.
Yes, what are the answers to these problems? Well, my number one is really think seriously about insuring your pet. Or if you don't, the other thing is to set up some sort of savings account. Insurance has got more expensive because obviously the overall costs are more. But I mean, I now insure my pets, even though I'm a vet, because I'm not in practice. I don't have access to all the equipment. And actually, it's a bit, when it's your own pet, sometimes it's better if someone else deals with it. So I have him insured, and I'm really glad, because he did have to go to a specialist and it cost quite a lot of money. He had a lot of treatment done, so I felt it was good value, but it was really nice that I only had to pay £90 excess.
Yeah. And same here, we've got all our cat and our dog insured, and I think for the dog, he's on long-term medication, and his pot of pills that I pick up once every 3 months is over £200. And actually, when I picked it up this last week, the practice said to me, "Oh, you are aware of how much this is going to cost?" And I'm like, yes, it's fine. But knowing that he's insured, and actually just that one excess at the start of the year, at the moment his insurance premium still justifies paying. I think if it, obviously it will continue to go up, and then we might have to consider, actually, what do we do? Is it worth just ensuring that we've got savings to cover it? So that's the other thing. You can put money into savings like you would into the premium, but you've always got to remember you might have an unexpected vet bill that comes in early on when you've not got that savings pot full up. So it's fine, something happens 10 years down the line, but maybe not in the first 1 to 2 years. So
and also thinking about insurance, and again, it could be a whole other podcast, but not all insurance policies are the same. And even within one company, they might offer different things. So it's worth really doing a bit of research, because I've got the policy, and I think you have as well, where it's sort of a policy for life, and that means that if they've had treatment for a condition, they don't automatically then put an exclusion on, which a lot of policies do. It's a bit more expensive because of that. But like with my cat that's had urinary tract problems, he's not been excluded, and although the policy went up a little bit, it actually didn't go up as much as I thought it might. So it's worth sort of really looking into it, and obviously there are sort of comparison websites and things like that, but overall that principle of either insuring or having a little pot of money is really important, I think. What's your next one, Vanessa?
Oh, so I think we've touched on this already, but finding a practice where you trust the staff, the people that work there, trust the vets, trust the receptionist when you walk in. What does it feel like? Do you get a good feeling when you go in there? Actually, can you have a really good conversation with the receptionist? What are the nurses like? Are they friendly towards you? You know, do you gel with them? And actually, when you're in that consulting room with the vet, what's that experience like? You know, is it a nice experience? If it isn't, then maybe think about going somewhere else. But actually, you really do need to be able to form that relationship, don't you?
So their communication with you is incredibly important.
It really is.
As well as it just being more pleasant, but actually, can you have those open conversations?
And trust is built from both sides, though, isn't it? So we must remember to be polite and kind to the staff within the practice. And a little reminder just to say, people might not be aware of this, but vets can actually sack you as a client. So if you're rude, difficult, aggressive, they can actually write to you and say, we'll no longer treat your animal. So, you know, just a bit of being humanly polite is the word.
Yes,
I think.
Absolutely. That, you know, even if, you know, you have a complaint, and obviously, you know, you are entitled to complain, but to do it in a calm manner, or just sort of getting cross with perhaps the receptionist who, you know, has had nothing to do with dealing with the case or whatever. You know, they're people too, so do try and sort of remain polite, because people are actually a bit shocked when you're suddenly told, no, sorry, we're not going to see you again. I think according to the RCVS sort of code of conduct, a vet has to finish that course of treatment and then give you notice. But after that point, they do not need to see you. I think even in an emergency, even though I think most vets would if it was an emergency, but you know, you are then responsible for finding another practice. But hopefully that's something that doesn't happen very often. It certainly didn't happen very often when we were in practice, but...
And you're always entitled to seek a second opinion as well, aren't you?
Yeah,
so if you're unhappy with the treatment that you've got and you can't get a resolution with the vets, then actually, you know, you are entitled to get a second opinion, which could be another vet at the same practice.
Yes.
Or you may feel more comfortable going elsewhere. But,
And you're entitled absolutely to do that. And so, as we said before, you know, ask questions and ask what the options are, and ask if you don't understand something. It is the vet's job to explain things thoroughly, and it should be in terms that you understand, because we have lots of jargon like every particular specialist does, or we have lots of acronyms and things that normal people might not understand. And obviously we shouldn't be using those really with clients, because we should be saying things in a way that's easy to understand.
Prevention, I think that would be one of my top tips. So
absolutely.
Actually prevention is always better than cure.
Yeah.
So getting regular routine health checks, at least annually, I'd recommend. Vaccines to prevent against the nasty diseases that hopefully are low in number now in the UK, but we are seeing some emerge in some areas. So
yes.
Actually let's get those vaccines in, and parasite control, so your flea and worming treatment. I know we'll probably cover more about flea and worming treatment in another podcast, but really important to think about the prevention rather than just going in for cure, because it's always going to be cheaper to provide preventative health than,
and also better welfare.
Completely.
I am again old enough that I remember the days before there was the parvovirus vaccine for dogs, when parvovirus is a really, really horrible viral infection that causes really terrible vomiting and diarrhea, and particularly in puppies it's often fatal. And it was awful before we had the vaccine, and there was a big outbreak in the late 70s, and, the vet practices were just full of all these poor dogs on drips. So it's much, much better to think about prevention. And sort of following on for that, also, if you are given advice by your vet about all sorts of things, say keeping your pets' weight under control, the vet's weight, that's difficult to control, but the pets, keeping your pet's weight under control. Things like decreasing their stress, or following instructions when you've had a bit of surgery done on your pet. If you're told to keep the animal away from the wound, we might have to use the dreaded cone of shame, or even now there's a little sort of almost vest things, aren't there, that you can get. Or they might give you some instructions about how to give the medication. If you follow those, then obviously they're more likely to get better quicker. And, for example, if you are not doing something to stop them licking the wound, they might open it up and then it might have to be restitched. Yeah. And then there will be a cost for that. Yeah. So, that's, and again, it's better for the animal as well, even though you have to be cruel to be kind sometimes, unfortunately.
Definitely. And I suppose another one is, if you're worried about your pet, making sure that you contact the practice sooner rather than later, just for advice. And there'll always be that the practice will be happy to offer advice over the phone. So actually, and some now may be doing it through various web chats, etc. So actually get in contact and talk to them. It's always better to talk to somebody at the practice rather than Dr. Google or other search engines. So many healthy issues are definitely easier and cheaper to treat if we see them early on. And sometimes it's hard to tell if your pet is in pain. So just getting prompt treatment or action or advice on board, particularly from a welfare perspective, is really, really important. Yeah. And just remember that we do have an Animal Welfare Act, so there's a legal requirement for you to ensure that your pet is protected from pain, suffering, injury and disease. So actually you must seek veterinary attention sooner rather than later.
And often the signs are subtle in some of our pets. I mean, cats are particularly difficult to read, and so any little change in their normal habits, it's worth even just chatting to the vet. It might be it's nothing, but it's much better to go earlier rather than later. And I think particularly with old pets, often people are so fearful that it will end in having to say goodbye to their pet that sometimes they leave it so long there's not much you can do. And it's awful if you're then questioned by the owner saying, could something have been done if I came in earlier? Because at that moment you don't want to upset them by saying, well, yes. But, it is better to seek help earlier.
Sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So if you're struggling with vet fees, there are a few things that we can suggest, aren't there, Maggie? So in terms of, where can people go for help? Because actually sometimes there are no options. You might not have insurance, it's an unexpected vet bill. What can we do to help people?
Yeah. Well, if you are in receipt of certain benefits, then there are some options where charities run veterinary clinics, like the PDSA or the Blue Cross run some, and some other charities as well, where you may be able to get low cost treatment. I mean, most of them do make some sort of a charge now because it's so expensive to run these clinics. Or there might be things like vouchers that you can get for certain procedures, like particularly neutering. Dogs Trust and Cats Protection can sometimes help, but usually you do have to be eligible. So it's certainly something to think about. And if you're not eligible for that, you could talk to your vet about whether they can do anything like, paying in instalments. Some may not. I mean, we're not saying they all can, but it's worth asking.
Some now use the kind of the interest-free payment plans as well, don't they? So
yes,
the interest-free loans, should I say? So they are available as well. You can some practices are signed up to those, so definitely worth asking about.
Yeah. And if you're homeless, there are several charities and groups, even from some of the vet schools, like Street Vet or Vets in the Community, that can help. And you know a bit about Street Vet, don't you, Vanessa?
Yeah, so I'm a trustee for Street Vet. So I'm the clinical governance trustee. So certainly they help a phenomenal number of homeless people around the country, so their pets. So
because often they can't get into the sort of hostels and things with their pets, and their pets are so important to them for that. So it's good. As we've mentioned before, another way which I think you can save money if your pet's on long-term medication is to use an online pharmacy. But as I think we mentioned in the previous podcast, you want to use one that is UK registered to make sure you do get the right products, and you will have to pay for a prescription from your vet, but you can save money on that. And I suppose the other thing is, if you're in a situation where you're really struggling, then don't get any more pets. Of course you want to look after the pet you've got, and you don't want to have to find another home for it, but don't go and buy more pets unless your circumstances change. I know that sounds obvious, but we have seen it sometimes in the charity world, and it's worth speaking to other charities, local charities, in case they can help you out. Obviously, charities are really stretched at the moment, so I suppose we can't promise that you'll always find one that is able to help you, because their resources are very, very stretched at the moment. But it's certainly worth reaching out and asking for help.
And certainly of your local smaller charities, and I think even the RSPCA's smaller branches sometimes are able to offer support. And we know there's a Blue Cross scheme as well that's run through your vets, so maybe talk to your vets if you're struggling, to see if they have any connections to any charity kind of support.
And if you're really struggling, there are some pet food banks as well, some that are linked to human ones, and some that are just more specifically pet, and some of them will also have some non-food items as well, bedding and toys and things like that. So it's certainly worth reaching out. Anyway, well, I hope that you found that useful. I suppose, overall, the overall message is be open and honest with your vet, and ask questions if you're not clear on anything. And you've got to be prepared for the fact that at some point your pet probably will need vet care, so think about how you're going to afford it.
Yes, I completely agree. Okay, I think that's all we've got time for today. So until next time, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Vet Stalking Pets with Dr. Maggie Roberts and Dr. Vanessa Howie. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at info@advovet.co.uk. And please join us again for our next episode. Your pets will thank you.